welcome to Crawlspace. I'm Tim here today with Lance. Lance, how are you today?
I'm doing so well today, Tim. Thank you for asking. The guest that we have on today, I really enjoy. One, because she writes about topics, and you know that I dig this. She writes about topics that I never knew I would find interesting. And this is a topic that never would have crossed my radar, never would have come up on my radar if we hadn't been connected with her. The second reason I love her is because she shares my name. So I'm considering myself a doctor as well because she's a doctor. How are you?
All right. Yeah, I'm doing well. And yes, this wonderful author and doctor that we're speaking with today is Rachel Lance. And she is the author of a new book called Chamber Divers that was released in spring of 2024. And it is a really interesting story. And what a really fascinating conversation. As you said, this is sort of a topic that I didn't know was going to be interesting.
Right. So just being a mild student of history, everyone does enjoy reading about, learning about World War II and learning about these things that went on behind the scenes in order for the Allied forces to gain an advantage in that war. And this is especially interesting because it deals with the concept of underwater intelligence and how to manage that and get the upper hand, which Rachel is a expert at because she is a biomedical engineer and blast injury specialist. Again, I never knew that existed, and we get to be educated about it today. And if you want to know more about Dr. Rachel Lance, you can go to her website at rachellanceWrites.com. And you can follow Rachel on Instagram at underwaterlance. And Tim, where can people follow us?
Folks can follow us on social media at Crawlspace Podcast or Crawlspace Pod. We're going to take a quick break for commercial, and we'll be right back with author Dr. Rachel Lance. Welcome to the podcast. Rachel Lance, how are you today?
I'm doing well. How are you guys?
We're doing awesome. It's so great to have you. We're really looking forward to this conversation. You and I are both doctors, so yes, I'm
Yes.
more of like a honorary type doctor. I'm not like officially a doctor.
Are you an internet doctor?
No, I'm a doctor just because we've spoken to so many doctors.
Okay.
So it's just sort of by default that I
That's
have.
like a step above Google Doctor.
Yeah, it's not a big step though.
Yeah.
Not a big step. But to avoid confusion, I had my last name changed to Rachel, so we can call me Dr. Rachel, so we don't get confused when we call you Dr. Lance.
That's perfect. Would
Yeah.
you like? And you don't even need to change your monogram. So like the initials are the same. That's careful planning. I like it.
I didn't even think of that part. Oh my God.
I'm always thinking about your towel collections.
Well, this is going to be quite a mind experiment that we're about to embark on here.
I will follow any tangent you let me take.
Perfect.
Good. So we've got Dr. Rachel Lance and we've got Dr. Lance Rachel here. Okay, Dr. Rachel Lance, can you tell us about you and your background?
Sure. That's a complicated question. So the version I think you care most about is that my PhD, not from Google, from Duke, is in biomedical engineering. And I specialize in injury biomechanics. And nobody knows what that means. That's fine. But basically, instead of using the principles of engineering to determine when a bridge will collapse or when a car will crash, I use them to determine when the human body is going to get injured or killed. We are subject to math, despite many of our best efforts in middle school, but that math still can work to apply when we're going to get a lung injury or when we're going to have a fractured bone. So I work half-time as a scientist doing that kind of research, specializing in extreme environments. I do a lot of undersea physiology. I do explosions whenever I can because who doesn't love explosions? And then also sometimes high altitude or outer space. And then with the other half of my time, I write. So this is my second nonfiction book. The first one was about an explosives project related to the Civil War that I did during grad school. And that was a really unique experience for me because that was the first time in my scientific career that people had actually asked me to talk about my work. Like, I would just try and change the topic. I'd be like, how are your kids? Do you have any drawings you want to show me from them? And they would not let me change the topic. They kept asking about that project. So that was a bit of a watershed moment when I realized that a lot of these issues of science that affect our daily lives, people do actually really care about them. They just don't necessarily want to get lost in the weeds of technical jargon. So I'm about to release my second book as well with kind of that same idea. And it's about a group of scientists who work in the same field as I do, except they're passed away. They were active during World War II, and they were doing a bunch of experiments on themselves to figure out what was necessary to enable the landing of the beaches at Normandy for D-Day. So this is a topic that's really near and dear to my heart because I do the same thing professionally. Obviously, I think they're pretty awesome. I'm really excited to get to talk about them. And other fun facts, aside from being a huge science nerd, I have 2 dogs. I love my dogs. I cycle a lot, and I love to bake. So, that's me in a nutshell.
Yeah, that's a fantastic nutshell.
Okay, thanks.
And I have a few questions before we get to your great book, Chamber Divers. How does somebody determine that is what they're going to study? Because it is nothing like what I've heard of before when we've spoken to other people in the science field. How did you even discover that?
Do you mean for me or their story or both?
Oh, I didn't even think about their story. I mean, you.
Yeah. Well, for me, I've just always been fascinated by the way that the lungs work. Again, we're going to get into you're going to learn real fast just how deep my nerdiness goes. But in college, my favorite topics were fluid mechanics of the cardiopulmonary system. So anytime they asked me to model how the heart pumped blood or model how the lungs processed oxygen, I was just all in. I was super fascinated. And a big part of that was because I myself have dealt with a history of cardiac arrhythmia. So I was able to see a lot of these things and how they happened in the real time. And the other part of that was because I think it's the most interesting system in the human body. Like, you can go 3 weeks without food. So the gut, obviously we need a gastrointestinal system. We can go 3 weeks without food, 3 days without water. You can only go 3 minutes without breathing. So this idea of going to a foreign environment like outer space or undersea, we're not as concerned with water supply or food supply. Our most immediate concern, anytime we try to go someplace we are not naturally equipped to survive, number one is always breathing, because that is the thing that will kill you first. And so that's kind of how I got into this. I originally did my bachelor's and master's in biomedical engineering at University of Michigan, and then I worked for the U.S. Navy building underwater equipment for a long time. So that was really fun because we had a really small group. We had a couple junior engineers like myself at that time, and then a couple senior engineers who were just real old salty guys who knew everything. And it gave me an opportunity to spend several years learning about underwater breathing and underwater systems from them. And then the Navy asked if I wanted to go back and do a PhD. So that's how I landed at Duke. Yeah, in the hyperbaric chamber. I actually originally started there as a volunteer test subject, letting them stick me with needles. So,
Whoa. Okay. Well, what are they testing you with? What are they sticking you with needles for? Yeah. What's in there?
Oh, fun. No, it really depends on the experiment. So a lot of the experiments we're doing today are more modern developments of the things that you're going to find in chamber divers. Like chamber divers, that's why this story was important to me. These people were the initial group of pioneers. They were the ones who were discovering that these concepts even existed, much less were problems. And today we kind of have ideas for what the safety limits are and what you should avoid, but we don't necessarily know how to fix them. So a lot of what we're still doing in the research community is looking at better ways to avoid these problems underwater, better ways to fix them if they do occur. So yeah, a whole bunch of different kinds of projects like that.
Yeah, and you had mentioned underwater explosions, high altitude or space explosions. Is that something that you work on, or you study the effects of that, or how? I'm picturing you in space and also underwater watching these explosions.
Well, you're kind of combining a couple things. By the time explosions are going off in space, Tim, no one's really asking about the math. Like several things have gone wrong to get you to that point. So like, it's more, what are we doing intentionally in space to keep people alive there? Hopefully nothing blows up. Yeah. So if you're combining three separate incidents. So we love to go underwater and survive. We'd love to separately go to space and survive. Explosions sometimes happen, usually not in space. We'd love to survive those too, especially the current generation of veterans. There's a lot of biomechanics questions related to IEDs and traumatic brain injury and things like that. So, yeah.
And have you come in contact with anything firsthand, like any particular person who's affected by this?
Oh, constantly.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, constantly. Yeah, no, that's a major part of my job, actually. So that most of my research now is funded by the Department of Defense. And I don't work on weapon systems. I exclusively work on safety. And so a lot of what they're looking at is keeping their people safe. And I work a lot with former military personnel in those areas who have experiences of those traumas, talking to them about what they experienced, what impact that's had on their life. And those types of personnel are also very involved with the research community. This is actually one of the things that I like about military research is that you have a government organization that's willing to provide funding, and you have military personnel who are willing to provide information about their own experience and who are willing to be participants in helping solve problems for the next generation. I think overall, like that's a really validating experience for me. But yeah, I spent a lot of time doing that.
Yeah, and we will get to chamber divers, I promise.
No,
this is just super fascinating.
Yeah, I'm glad you think so.
Is it difficult to work with people one-on-one who have sustained these injuries and to tell them the importance of what they're doing?
I don't think it's difficult. My main struggle with it is just because I'm only one person, and I think they all deserve answers. So I'm only one person. I can only do so much. I'm easy to find on the internet. I make it a point of pride. Anytime a veteran emails me, I guarantee you I'm emailing them back. They're getting the full explanation that they need. On occasion, not a lot, but like if we need a phone call to explain it, that's fine. But I am, as a human being, have limited resources. And so that's actually the really stressful part for me, is feeling like this is a community that really deserves the answers about their own bodies. Like everybody deserves medical information about themselves, they just in general. But this community particularly so, because they signed up to serve their country. They don't, after that point, they don't really get a choice in how they're used. So whoever is leading the country, whoever's in Congress, whoever's president, this group of people has just agreed to be part of whatever they're told to do. And so from that point forward, I think we as a country are responsible for their health and safety. Yeah. So I don't find it difficult in the sense of not wanting to work with them. I find it difficult in the sense of not being able to provide enough resources all the time.
Okay, so if you could tell us a little bit about your new book that I believe is coming out in April, Chamber Divers. Yeah, what is Chamber Divers about?
Yeah, it's World War II, big into military history for obvious reasons. Every time someone blows up, I'm reading the case report. So military history, World War II. This whole story started for me because a member of this group published a paper about carbon dioxide in 1941. And I read it, and I'd known about it as a scientist. And then one day I was like, wait a minute. If it's 1941, that means he did the science the year before in 1940. And this guy's in London. Like, I don't know about you guys, London in 1940, not a safe place. There were so many bombs. This is the literal Blitz of London. So this guy and his lab are being bombed at the time. And for some reason, they're studying carbon dioxide. And I was like, what the heck is going on? So I just kept digging and digging. And that's what finally led me to this story where I was finally able to take their lab notebooks as well as the reports they generated and match them up with the military guidance. They were testing these first principles of underwater diving and these first principles of underwater physiology, and they were using them to help the Allies plan to scout the beaches of Normandy. So you got to keep in mind as well, Jacques Cousteau didn't really invent scuba until toward the end of World War II. He was building that in Nazi-occupied France. So at this time, to go diving or to exist underwater, you need a giant Cuba Gooding Jr. hard hat, essentially. So this group was one of the first groups who was like, let's figure out how to do this without all of that. So maybe we get shot at less. Always a great goal. And what's most important to me about it is they were doing all the experiments on themselves. So half of this group has literally just fled mainland Europe. They're Jewish refugees. They've come to England for refuge for them and their families. They're working there as scientists. London starts getting bombed, and the Allies are like, oh man, we don't know anything about underwater. We need a group who can tell us. This group of people, and there were men and women there too, they decided to step up and they put themselves in the chambers. That's why the book has its name, Chamber Divers. They pressurized themselves, they simulated the underwater environment, and they figured out the answers to these questions.
And you described the scientists as controversial. These were a controversial group, and they were led by a married couple. Can you get a little bit more into why this was controversial and what that married couple was like?
Yeah. So the male leader of the lab was John Burden Sanderson Haldane. He went by JBS Haldane. Apparently, a lot of people just called him the prof. And he was that big of a presence. Like, you're at a university and you know who you're talking about based on the nickname, the prof. And he was controversial because I actually really like him. So for me, these are compliments. But he was one of those people who grew up incredibly wealthy and who had never been told no, but in a way where he was not using it to take advantage of others, in a way where he was just using it to answer scientific questions. So like when the Blitz starts and the university evacuates, this group does genetics. That's what they're actually studying, is genetics. So they have mice and flies and other small animals. They're told to evacuate. JBS says, no, I don't feel like it. Like, this is where my science is. And so they start, as a group, doing their science at night with the blackout curtains drawn, not necessarily just for the bombers, but so that the university doesn't bust them and evict them. So they're crawling over fences to get to their lab. At one point, I've got this letter from JBS Haldane instructing someone how to break into the lab to come see him and what lies to tell them the card. So say you're a government inspector, say you're from this department, he'll let you right in. So this group was really controversial in that sense. This was a person who had never put a bridle on his opinion for anyone. This was, the 1930s was a really contentious period for science because he was on the side of genetics. This was a time period where Hitler was not alone. A lot of people were also eugenicists. So this guy Haldane was on the side of genetics. Other people were saying the whole point of genetics is to breed better turtles, horses, or people. And those two groups really fought. So he was scientifically controversial. He was controversial to manage. And then he also had married a divorcee. And this was in the time period of there wasn't no fault divorce. So they kind of had to stage this scandal where she spent the night with a reporter and then he reported on it. And it was this whole big thing. And it was really just because she wanted a divorce. So yeah, he just generally didn't care what anyone thought, in a way that's pretty interesting. And I think that's a big part of what drew him to his eventual wife. Her name was Helen Spurway. She did start off as one of his students, but it's pretty well documented that she walked in the first day of class and was like, yeah, I'm going to marry the professor. So they kind of got together and they seem to have been a really great match because they mutually had this monomania for science and for results. aside from cats, they really didn't care about anything else. Like they both kept diaries of like cats that they'd seen in the streets. So
Wow.
yeah, they were studying the genetics of their fur patterns. So yeah, right. This is a couple where two people are both doing that. So they really belong together. But her name was Helen Sparroway. She was a PhD in genetics in her own right. And in a time period where a lot of women were not given equal access, he really provided her with almost an equal leadership role in the lab and kind of let her take a leadership role in these experiments as well. So she also becomes this major contributor. And they only got married at the end. Neither of them understood the point of the institution of marriage in what is very clearly like a scientist move. They only got married because some university, I think the Sorbonne, needed them to be married in order for them to share housing when they visited. So...
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Well, how did you get access to these records and this story?
Oh man, that was a trick. So it was the pandemic when I was writing. That was a challenge. And I also had meant to go like January 2020, but I was having knee problems. And I was like, I'll just have my knee surgery first, and then I can walk through England better. That was a terrible life decision. So at the start, I ended up working with a lot of local people and paying people who lived locally to these archives and libraries. And a lot of archives and libraries have a network of people you can do that with. They're researchers, they're used to the library, and they'll go copy things for you. So that's how I started, especially as many of these archives were opening like one day a week. Right. That's not practical for me to try to fly to Scotland to be able to work one day a week. But then eventually, once things opened up a little bit more and I was able to get to the UK archives in London, then I went over there and was able to pillage all the government reports at once, which was very exciting for me. So
I think there's some dots that need to be connected there. How do you pillage the government reports? Did you like go in the laundry basket and like pop out and then grab them?
I did.
Oh,
I'm
wow.
a fan of the cheese cart hiding method, like just really. No, guys, these things are from the 1940s. They're not secret anymore. You can just ask. There's no stealth required, no blackmail. You just email the librarian and you're like, I'd like to read this. So a lot of them had not yet been declassified.
But you need like an anonymous email address or something. You can't tell them who you are, right?
Yeah, like a burner.
I actually prefer carrier pigeon.
Okay, good. There has to be some mystery.
It's harder to track, but more feces, but more secure. So no, a lot of these reports, this is true if you go to the U.S. National Archives too. If you have a question about American history in particular, you can, and the British have similar laws as well, you can always make the request. They can tell you no, but they are legally required to review the materials and see if they still contain anything that could jeopardize national security. So a lot of these materials had been kind of declassified automatically over the decades. And then some of them I had to submit requests for. But once we got through that processing, there was not a lot of pushback because I was able to show that these are not national security risks. So yeah, if you want to fly to the UK and handle original government reports from the planning of D-Day that Hitler would have once killed 7,000 people to get his hands on, you can do that. And it's kind of an awesome experience.
I bet. What was it like looking through that, getting that glimpse into history, especially in the field that you're so interested in, because that's different than reading a book that's been published. I mean, you're looking at history. That must have been so exhilarating.
It's not just looking at history. I don't know about you guys, but I like to touch stuff. So I'm the kid that they have to put up the velvet rope for in the museums. So I think it's really amazing, especially because archival work. In archives, there are millions and millions of documents, right? So when you ask for something, you just get a tiny catalog description, and you don't know if it's going to be exactly what you need or if it's going to be something else completely. So one document, for example, was it was listed as Helen Sparroway's diary from 1940. And I was like, oh, dang, this is going to be awesome. She's going to write her thoughts and feelings. No. The word in diary in England means something different. It was literally like a daily pocket calendar where she had noted the colors of geckos she'd seen. Like that was all the information I got. So you have this slot machine type experience where you put in your request and you pull the handle and you never know what's going to come out of the dispenser. And then other times you pull the handle and you open this report, and not only is this document that confirms all of your theories, but it's got like handwritten pencil marks from the actual people involved. And they've got like stuff that they've tacked on. So this is the physical sheet of paper that they were passing between their desks. And you can just kind of handle it and flip through it, right? You have to be respectful, but it's not like it's the original Declaration of Independence. Like they let you just handle it and copy it and things like that, which is in my opinion, a very humbling experience.
And we'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program. You mentioned these scientists who are part of the subject of your book, Chamber Divers, and they experimented on themselves. What kind of experiments did they do on themselves?
Bananas ones. So hyperbaric chambers, first of all, are large metal tubes. They're typically cylindrical. They are sometimes spherical. And the reason for that is because they hold large amounts of pressure. So when we pump pressure through the form of pressurized air into these, that's how we simulate diving to the depths of the ocean. It's obviously way easier to be able to do this in a metal tube inside of a lab than it is to have to go out on a boat and reach 200 feet in the actual ocean every day. So it cuts out a huge amount of the logistics, but the physiology stays the same. So I like when I'm doing research, I like to joke like that I was just diving at 300 feet or whatever, and I came up and just drove home. And so it cuts out a lot of the logistical overhead. And so what these divers were doing in these hyperbaric chambers were testing on themselves these principles of diving physiology. And so as the Allies were also developing breathing apparatuses, they would put them first in the chambers with these scientists to see what effect they had on the body. So for example, one of the experiment types that they realized halfway through was going to be super alarming was looking to see how deep you can go while breathing pure oxygen. Did you know that oxygen is a poison? We need it. It's also what kills us. So a lot of people have theorized that oxygen is actually why we age and die. So on the time scale of human life, oxygen is killing you over about average 72 years. If you take away the oxygen, you die a lot faster. But if you add too much oxygen, you die a lot faster too. So we actually saw this in the hospital environment with the COVID-19 pandemic a lot. When you put people on 100% oxygen, you have to have this balance. The 100% oxygen will eventually irritate their lungs over the time scale of about 2 to 4 days, filling their lungs with fluid. So you can't just put someone on 100% oxygen all the time because you're killing them faster with it eventually. So you have to balance the amount of oxygen versus the damage being done by the disease. And that same problem occurs underwater. You have to balance the amount of oxygen that you need to survive versus the damage that it's doing when you're under pressure. So what this group was doing was putting themselves in the chambers, pressurizing the chambers, and then seeing how long it took before they had seizures. Yep, literal seizures. So some of these were incredibly powerful and violent. And I wrote some of those stories in the book. And even on a good day, on the best day, they're sitting there breathing this stuff down, waiting to have a seizure, like waiting for catastrophe to strike, because they know that if they don't do it in the chamber, then one of the Navy sailors and divers might experience this on a hostile beach in France. So better to have a seizure where you have help, where you can get out of the chamber, where Nazis are not going to shoot you in the face, than have a diver have this experience as they're doing the actual mission. So that's why they put themselves on the line first. They were trying to safeguard the people who would be eventually doing this scouting, eventually doing this diving. And almost all of them had very serious injuries as a result of these tests. So several of them broke their spines.
Oh my God.
Yeah, Helen Spurway, the eventual wife of the lab leader, JBS Haldane's wife, or eventual wife, Dr. Helen Spurway. She had one particular experiment where they brought her up, like they brought the pressure of the chamber back to the surface, but she just kept seizing over and over. And so the person who's in there with her keeps having to reset her jaw because her seizures are so powerful that she keeps dislocating her jaw in the process. And this guy is an MD. So thankfully he's a physician, but he's never actually practiced. He got his medical degree and then he had to flee Hitler. So he wasn't put in a concentration camp. So he never actually got to practice medicine. Now he's stuck in a metal tube, relocating this woman's jaw over and over while she keeps having seizures. It's just absolutely bonkers. And then they went back again. Like none of them had these incidents and then quit because they were not done with the experiments yet.
Oh my God.
Jeez.
Yeah. It's dedication.
Doesn't that just like put a lot of things into perspective when you discover all of the people that fought the war but didn't like fight on the front lines, but they were fighting in the background like that to prepare the people who are on the front lines to perform at their peak, you know, to gain the advantage?
Yeah, absolutely. It puts things in perspective. And it also is like, there were two things that I think are really relevant to what you just said. First of all, I hope we've all been watching Masters of the Air because it's great. But there is a really amazing dialect speech part in there where they talk about the ground crews and the amount of work the ground crews do. And like, these are people who are still putting in huge amounts of their life and their energy. And so the same thing is true with the science labs. And then this group in particular, member of the group was actually originally going to enlist. He was looking to sign up and he wrote looking for a letter of recommendation because he'd worked with them before. And they were like, hey, don't sign up. We're going to get you out of the draft, but also you'll probably be in more danger. We just actually need your help with this. So that was their agreement. He eventually did go become an officer once they had enough people to supplement that he could be replaced. But at the beginning, he was doing these experiments. He was doing them on himself. He was exposing himself to this stuff. And they were at one point in the middle of a bombing raid, stuck in a hyperbaric chamber where you physically can't get out. And this chamber was dangling from a crane. And the crane operator ran to the bomb shelter. So this guy is definitely not dodging danger. He's just doing it contributing in a different way.
Wow. Any deaths due to these experiments?
None of them died. So like I said, a lot of them had permanent lifelong injuries. One of them had a permanent lung issue where he was very debilitated by that for the rest of his life. Two of them had permanent back trauma from fracturing vertebrae, but none of them died. Yeah, which is kind of a miracle. Yeah.
Tell us about all of the accommodations and all of the awards that the government bestowed upon this group for their heroic efforts.
Are you being sarcastic?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, good. Just clarifying. The government sent some of them a letter saying thank you, and then they were never allowed to talk about it again. So, yeah. Actually, a lot of their work was stolen. So this book coming out is going to be some news to my scientific field because the person who stole this group's work actually then published a lot of it in the 1990s because he outlived most of them. And he was part of the government, so he was able to make sure their reports were all classified. So he was single-handedly kind of the reason why they never got credit, they never got to talk about it, and he took credit for it, and I think that's why he did it. So a lot of our field is going to find out for the first time that this guy was in fact a liar who didn't really do any of the work he claimed. So
wow.
Yeah.
And that guy's still alive?
No, he's since passed away.
Okay.
Yeah, no, he's gone. He's been gone for a little while now, but he published his book in the 1990s. So,
and his reputation was one of respect?
His scientific reputation was one of respect exclusively because of this work. Like, he didn't actually really achieve anything after it, and everyone was sort of confused as to what happened. And I think now that makes sense. He never did this in the first place. He took it from somebody else. So in my opinion, that's really upsetting. First of all, a lot of the people he stole from were women. That kind of stuff still happens today. A guy gets into a position of more power and he steals from people who he knows are not going to be listened to. Obviously, that's a small percentage of people who choose to make those choices, but it's still a power dynamic that is possible. And then on top of it, too, he took away a job that a real scientist could have done. Like, that meant that he spent another 50 years wasting the government's money, taking a high-level position that someone else could have done more for the military community. So the military are the ones that suffer when that happens, which is annoying to me.
It is super annoying. And as you're writing this book, are you becoming irritated with this? Are you getting like emotionally like vested in these stories? And how do you then like wrap up your feelings about all of this and try to end the book? Because I feel like with all of that, especially with you being so into and immersed in that particular field, like how do you wrap up everything and make an ending on this?
Thank you for thinking that I've figured out how to emotionally resolve these things. It's a very flattering assumption on your part. No, I'm still mad. I get really emotionally invested in these stories. Like any book, at least the two that I've written, I can't talk like I'm an old seasoned vet at this point, but the two that I've written, the book is maybe 5 to 10% of the research total. Because in order to find out if something has relevance, I have to chase it all the way to the conclusion. Sometimes it turns out to be awesome. Sometimes it turns out not to matter at all. So of the total amount of research that I'm doing, maybe 5 to 10% ends up in the story itself. But along that process, like as you learn these details of people's lives, I get really emotionally invested in them. Like J.B.S. Haldane, apparently in his desk, he had a drawer that was full of chocolate and peppermints. And I know why. It's because I have a sugar problem. But like this detail just made him so real to me. And I really just wanted to like go see what kind of chocolate and peppermints he had in his drawer 80 years ago. Right. So I get emotionally invested in these people. I want to know them better as people. And then when bad things happen to them, I find it really upsetting. So I don't necessarily know how to resolve that aside from just telling the truth. There's something really, really valuable in providing closure about being able to tell the true story.
Do you have a favorite story from the book?
I'm obsessed with one character in particular, and her name was Elizabeth German. That's spelled Jermyn, not like the Germans. But I just think we would have gotten along. And I've talked with her son a bunch of times, and he's just really nice. Like all the family members that survived were really supportive. But she had this degree. She got a degree in chemistry, and she took scientific German for fun. Like that's her idea of a good time. And she played lacrosse and she rowed crew, and she was just a really passionate whirlwind of a person. And naturally in the 1940s, they made her the secretary. So like she was a fully qualified scientist, but she was doing these experiments on herself as the secretary for something like 10% of the pay of what the professor is getting for the same thing. And like, but she just took it like, and took what she needed from it in the most amazing way. Like her son and the way he talks about her, he has the most respect for his mother. And she's since passed away. I believe it's 2006. But after the war was starting to wane down and their experiments were done, she decided she really wanted to go to med school. She wanted her MD. And the government wouldn't let her quit being a secretary because it said her and this lab were too critical to the war effort. So she worked out a schedule where she was both working full time and going to med school. And I forget, but it was something like 120 hours a week. It was absolutely nuts. And then that was actually what she did. So she's one of these early trailblazing women who went to medical school. She graduates with honors. She starts her own medical practice. And she did this all while also working a full-time job for which she never really got enough credit. And so I think she's just an incredibly impressive person. And then she also seemed to be nice. She was nice. She would not charge if people didn't have a lot of money. She would just treat them and not charge them. Towards the end of her life, her best friend was her butcher, and they would exchange letters. It was just really cute. Yeah.
Very cool. So how do these scientists impact the war?
They made a massive difference. Two particular reasons. The first reason are these miniature submarines called X-Craft, which I will fully admit I'd never heard of, even though I am the submarine nerd. So these submarines were 40 feet long on the outside, which means that on the inside, by the time you equip all the machinery in there, they're about the size of a teacup. And so they would have up to 5 people, but they actually had to do experiments to see whether people could physically handle being that compressed for that long. And this group did all of the early research into looking at the oxygen supply and removing the carbon dioxide. So that story I told you before, where they were dangling in a chamber from a crane, that chamber in that case was simulating one of these X-Craft. And so these guys it was 2 guys in that case, but they were testing on themselves how much absorbent they needed to bring in to process the carbon dioxide to let the X-Craft stay unseen and hidden at the bottom of the ocean the whole day. So before D-Day happens, in about the 6 months before, they have several missions. The British send these X-Crafts over, and they let swimmers come out at night. So these X-Craft are literally just sitting on the bottom of the ocean during the day. People are crammed inside. They've got this carbon dioxide absorbent that's been tested by the lab group. And then at night, they finally get an opportunity to come to the surface, let swimmers out, refresh the air. The swimmers go ashore. They're taking measurements. They're taking sand samples. They're looking for places where the Germans have built new gun reinforcements. They are bringing all of this in. They literally had old school Western movie bandolier for ammunition, except they had test tubes full of soil in there. So that is how the Allies knew what kind of beach they were landing on. So they had their sediment experts analyzing this and then finding the comparable beaches in England. And that was then how the troops were practicing. That was how they were testing their equipment, because there had been previous landings where they got ashore and it turned out the tanks wouldn't run on that type of beach. So they were testing their equipment, making sure the tanks ran, making sure the vehicles ran, making sure the troops had the ability to practice every single detail as closely as possible before the actual day. That way it would feel really familiar when it happened. And then the second way that the group contributed was because they had figured out these principles of decompression sickness and of oxygen and of the breathing apparatuses. They created the first underwater breathing apparatuses with safety guidelines to use them. So as the D-Day landings are occurring, the British actually sent divers. The divers didn't end up doing too much underwater on the day of because of the amount of boat traffic. But in the days after, on all the beaches, these divers are working down there. You know those infamous hedgehogs, those big things that look like jacks? They're the ones blowing these apart. So those were not necessarily removed. They wrapped them in explosives and blew them apart so that they were small piles so that the boats could go over. And the divers were able to do that, and they combed the beaches and the soil on the bottom of the ocean underwater using these breathing apparatuses to dispose of all the explosive ordnance down there. So one thing that I think is phenomenal about this story is you never hear about these divers from D-Day because there were 0 accidents. There was not one fatality. There was not one diving-related casualty. And based on what they knew before the war, if they'd gone in with that level of misinformation, they would have all died. There would have been some serious body count from just the diving alone. But because this science group had done these experiments on themselves and put themselves through it first, there's not a single military person injured in that way.
That's incredible. That's
right.
Incredible.
That's the holy grail of science, right? to do something so well that no one gets hurt and it's not considered a story. Like, that's how you know as a scientist or an engineer when you've done something right, when nobody even notices because it's not a problem.
I compare that to, I've used this before, it's a bad sign if you know the third base coach of a baseball team.
Yeah, that's a perfect example, because you're like, that's the one that's messing up.
Why else would I know the guy's name? He's making all the wrong calls. So that's well, Wendell Kim used to jump over the line. He was a lot of fun.
All right, fine, Tim. There are
one
exceptions
exception.
to every rule.
Good nickname too.
We'll allow it.
Yeah. And we'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program.
As we're coming to the conclusion here, I want to kind of shift topics a little bit and talk about your work at Duke in regards to the sex discrimination and the wage disparage, and just your work in that. I think that's an important topic to hit on here.
Keeping it light, huh?
Yeah. I figured you were just laughing, so let's bring it down.
Because it's a podcast, I see that Lance has changed his name to Dr. Rachel on his screen. So I approve. You can borrow it. It's fine. So
I do feel smarter.
Yeah, good. I'm glad. I don't. So I was referring to myself, not you. That was not an insult for you. I mean,
well, either way, it was funny.
Yeah. So science is part of who I am as a person. Like, it's not my job. It's part of my identity. And it is therefore something that, unfortunately, I've had to fight for at times. When I was working for the Navy, there was an equal pay issue, which they acknowledged, but they wouldn't talk about. And I ended up just kind of leaving because they wouldn't even talk to me about it. And they were admitting it was real. Like, they admitted it was real in writing, but they were just like, no, it's fine. Keep working. So I ended up leaving because Duke was willing to give me a home for a project that I was working on. That was really important to me. That had to do with one of my divers who had died. And so when the Navy threatened to make me give back all the funds if I didn't stop asking about equal pay, Duke gave me a home, and that's how I ended up there longer term. And the people that I work with day to day and immediately are really great. Like, I very much enjoyed working with them. I think they teach me a lot on a daily basis. I learn so much from them. But the reality is, I'm the first woman ever allowed to work as a principal investigator at that clinic, at the hyperbarics clinic. Principal investigator being someone who leads projects. So I'm the first woman ever to be allowed to do that. And they've been around for 55 years. And over the course of this conversation, I've spent 3 years trying to have internal conversations with them. During that time, I didn't tell anyone. But unfortunately, if you kind of want to protect yourself, eventually you need to get involved with the legal system. And that was what ended up happening. That went public August of last year. I still have a lot of mixed feelings about it, because to me, my job is to go help military personnel not die. That is all I want to do. I just want to show up and do that. But I'm also paid with a very substantial pay gap between the men in the clinic who do the same job. It's about 40%. Or it was at the time of my hiring. Now it's still pretty bad, but they changed it a little bit. But yeah, it's been really frustrating and depressing seeing how much people care about having great PR, saying they're fans of equity, but not actually being willing to do anything to change it. So Duke has responded by telling me that I'm the only person that they gave this particular job title to, which I didn't really understand at the time. There wasn't any information about it, but it turns out it's a ceremonial job title, and it's not supposed to be associated with any salary at all. And so Duke says there can be no gender-based pay gap because I make more than $0. So that's where I am. Just trying to get my projects done, trying to serve the communities that I think it's my responsibility to serve. And I feel an obligation. the way that our legal system is set up, it is easier for me to just quit. It would be easier for me to just quit and leave and never talk about it again. But I have female students, and I don't feel like I can ethically do that if these are the same professors who are grading them. So.
Wow. Yeah. Well, kudos to you for fighting what you believe in. That's very important.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And really, like, for what's right, there's no.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, there's no difference in the results based on gender.
It's just been really depressing to watch, especially because one thing that I think is really important here is that I'm fully self-funded. So I bring all my own money. So Duke actually makes 63% overhead. So if they paid me the same amount as everyone else, they would make more money. So none of it really makes any sense to me. As someone who's probably problematically logical in certain facets of her life, my brain keeps trying to recompute, and it just can't. So I'm just going to do what I feel like I have to do until I can't anymore. But we'll see.
Well, don't ever get involved in podcasting, because that is a nearly impossible financial situation to figure out, regardless of
I'm already being paid as a part-time assistant to my male research partner, so can it get a lot worse?
Do you mind if I ask you said that you enjoy baking. What is your favorite thing that you've baked? And also, are you impressed that for the first time ever, I made prosciutto and cheddar scones last weekend?
I'm super impressed. First of all, because I'm half Italian. So anything with prosciutto, straight after my heart. Second of all, I'm human. So anything with cheese, straight after my heart. So congratulations. Scones are delicious. Yeah, I really love baking. I'd actually, I'll send you pictures afterwards. But I do also do a lot of Brazilian jiu-jitsu, which is really fun. And we had like a Valentine's Day event, and you're supposed to bring your Valentine to fight. And so I baked for that. And it was really fun because I made cheesecake tartlets. So I sort of smashed together all my favorite recipes. And I did like an Oreo cookie shell. Then there was a layer of thick fudgy brownie. And then there was a cheesecake dome on top with like a chocolate mirror glaze and some white chocolate dusted over it. So I was pretty proud of those. Those turned out really well. They went really quick. We called them 100 kilos of chocolate. For any jiu-jitsu listeners out there, that's like a jiu-jitsu move or a position. But
that sounds delicious.
Thanks.
What belt are you?
Oh, I'm still a white belt. I've only been doing it for about a year. I'd previously done another, like a striking martial art. But yeah, I compensate by being giant. So I'm almost 6 feet tall, and I'm very comfortable with my size. So I spend a lot of time fighting with the guys because there just aren't a lot of women who are my size.
Wow. Well, amazing. Well, great work on your new book, Rachel. Do you have another book in store for us after this one?
I do. I'm already working on it. I haven't done too much because, or I can't talk about it too much because I don't have the proposal sold yet. But I will tell you that I think I found America's first female special agent, and she was doing some pretty badass thing, hunting some German spies during World War I. So she was awesome. As far as I can tell, based on what I have now, she spoke 11 languages, and that's why they needed to hire her. And she was just like tracking their invisible ink stuff. It was cool. She was cool. So, yeah.
Very cool. Well, definitely let us know when that's coming out, because we'd love to have you back on for that.
Yeah, I'd love to. So.
And for people who want to pick up Chamber Divers or your other book, In the Waves, where do you typically direct them? And we'll also have links in the show notes.
Oh, thanks so much. You can get them really anywhere that works for you. I do try and guide people towards bookstores that maintain physical storefronts. So if you have a local independent bookstore, please go there, because if we lose the storefronts, then we don't have anywhere I can go to smell the books. But I mean, I know libraries exist, but it's just not the same, guys. So like.
Yeah, good. We try to do that as well. In the show notes, we'll have. No, we do. We will do like bookshop.org instead of.
Yes, bookshop.org is great. Yeah, just anywhere, because those booksellers, like, they bring so much information and feedback to authors. Like, I get interaction through the bookstores. And so now that I'm an author, I realize their importance even more than before, when I just thought they were a pleasant place for me to go, because they really are the link between authors and the community that we write for. So that there's something really nice about that as an author. So I try to support them when I can.
Yeah. And Tim was shy about this, so I'm going to ask for him. But he said if you needed anyone to do the audio version of Chamber Divers, he does a ton of accents. He can do German, British. If you need a voice actor, he's throwing his hat in the ring.
Oh my gosh, I wish I had enough clout to like dictate that, but I'm not that important. I'm sorry, Tim. I would. If you'd like, I would be more than happy to sit and listen to all of your accents, because I really want to know.
Please, I'll audition right now.
They're actually already recording it. They do have a British voice actor for it, so that's pretty exciting.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is it better than this? Welcome to Chamber Divers, read by Tim Pilleri. Not bad.
Tim, the only thing better than that is your Overlook Hotel poster that I can see here.
Good eye there.
I saw that immediately, and I've been waiting to bring it up because that's one of my all-time favorite movies. So yeah, yeah, amazing.
Well, very cool. Thank you so much, Rachel, for joining us here today. This has been a lot of fun chatting with you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I listened to a couple episodes, and I'm a fan of the podcast now. So thanks a lot for having me.